Hello and welcome to the NIGP webinar, Administering Change, Solutions to Managing Remote Work Environments. Part 1, The People. Today's webinar is being facilitated by Marquita Gillespie. Panelists include Sharita Bryant, Kate Rotella, Todd Slater, and John Stodala. Marquita is a dynamic speaker, trainer, consultant, and experienced leader with 29 years in the procurement profession. As the former director of the City of Tucson's Department of Procurement, Marquita has over 27 years of experience in one of the country's largest, most highly acclaimed procurement organizations. Marquita is a master instructor for NIGP as well as a content contributor for the NIGP Pathways educational program. She is the 2019 Albert H. Hall recipient and the 2017 Distinguished Service Award recipient, the highest and the second highest honors bestowed upon individuals by NIGP in the procurement profession. If at any time during the webinar you need technical assistance, please let us know in the Q&A box. During the presentation, you may submit questions to the Q&A box on your screen, and we will take them during specified parts of the presentation. Marquita, would you like to go ahead and get us started?
Hi, everybody. It's so wonderful to be here with you today. I'm so excited that you've been able to join this panel discussion. We have an amazing panel. And we're really excited about this topic. We think this is a very relevant topic for all of you. And so we're excited to share some thoughts and ideas, and we really do welcome your questions. So as Justin mentioned, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box, and we're going to do our best to answer them. And I think on behalf of the panel, I can commit if we can't get to all the questions, we will follow up directly by email with the thoughts from our panelists. So without further ado, I'm going to go right into trying to introduce my group here. And I'm going to have them all on video, and I'm going to turn my video off so you can see all of their faces. If you have not done this before by Zoom, you can arrange your window so that you can see the thumbnail of our speakers, but we do have slides that will also keep up for your viewing pleasure. So I'm going to start off with Ms. Sharita Bryant. Sharita is the Procurement Management Account Executive for the Commonwealth of Virginia, where she has worked for 19 years. She currently serves as the second past president of the Virginia Association Governmental Purchasing Group and serves on the board of directors for the Henrico County Council of PTAs. She provides e-technical and procurement consulting services, develops and facilitates procurement training events, conducts compliance reviews, and provides executive management recommendations of operational enhancements and efficiencies to client entities. She has also worked for the Virginia Department of General Services and the Virginia Department of Motor Vehicles. So welcome, Sharita. We're super excited to have you here.
Thank you.
Next, I have Kate Rotella. Kate Rotella is the purchasing manager for the Capital Regional Education Council. Previously, she has overseen procurement departments for a municipality and a higher education institution. Kate is a state representative serving Stonington and North Stonington's 43rd District. She serves as a member of the Appropriations Committee, Education Committee, and Internship Committee. She is the legislative chair for the Purchasing Association of Connecticut, and she's a member of the Purchasing Council for Capital Region Council of Governments. On the national level, Kate is one of our NIGP board members, and she occupies the role of finance chair and treasurer. She received her master's degree in public administration from the University of New Haven and her bachelor's of science in economics from Eastern Connecticut State University. So welcome, Kate. We're excited to have you with us today.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have NIGP's own Todd Slater. Todd is the Chief Content Officer for NIGP. He has over 20 years of experience transforming global learning programs using technology and innovative instructional methods. During his career, Todd has managed global remote workforces and project teams. He holds a bachelor's degree in telecommunications from Michigan State University, a master's degree in instructional design from the University of Central Florida, and a doctorate in adult education from Capella University. He also sits on several industry boards and speaks in both domestic and international settings. And we're so pleased to have you with us today, Todd. Welcome.
Great, thanks to be here.
And last but not least, we have John Stadola. John joined the Toro Company in 2015 and serves as the Government Contracts Manager for North America. In his role, he works with Toro's distribution teams on education and positioning of government contracts. John also has responsibility for helping develop and implement strategies targeted at growing the sports field and grounds market segments, which represents professional and collegiate sports, educational institutions, and government, including federal, state, and local. John is chair of the NIGP Business Council. Prior to his work with Toro, John spent 4 years with Office Depot, where he served as the Government and Education Manager, assisting K-12s, higher ed, state and local, in the design and implementation of customized procurement programs that address their financial goals and community objectives. He holds a Certified Sales Executive designation from Sales and Marketing Executives International, which places a high value on ethical sales practices. And John, we're so pleased to have you with us. We're thankful that we have you representing the entire public sector of our suppliers and contractors. So welcome.
Thank you, Marquita, and welcome everybody. Look forward to serving in that capacity. I hope I do it justice.
You will, you will. So thank you to my panel. I'm excited to have them share their thoughts. But before we have them share, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how we came to this session. You know, many of you, all of us really, are dealing with this whole new world, right? We're engaged in this virtual world. Some of it has been an easy transition, some of it's been challenging, but we have a lot going on. Many of you are dealing with multiple emergencies out there. You're dealing with adjusting to working from home, so that whole home work-life balance. We're dealing with things in our communities, and certainly not the least of which is the COVID situation, which has really changed our world. And I think one of the reasons this topic really resonated with the group is because everyone is having to deal with it all at the same time. So whether you are a supervisor or your staff, you are confronted with almost every single one of these challenges. So I thought we'd start off with, and with some help from Justin, he'll let me know if this requires anything on my end, but we're going to ask a couple polling questions. So we want to know a little bit about our audience. Awesome. So here's our poll question. If you can answer those for us, that would be great. The first question is, are you currently in a manager or supervisor role? And then give us a sense of how many years you've been in procurement. And we'll give you a minute to answer those questions. We're thankful there's so many of you with us today. I think we have about 400 joining us today, so that's excellent. Give you a second to do that.
Yeah, we'll give everybody about 10 more seconds to get their response in. And Marquita, here are the results.
All right. Oh, awesome. So we have a nice balance of managers and supervisors and staff members. So that's great because we do want to touch upon both perspectives. And also looks like we have a lot of you who are experienced in the profession. You're going to offer us some great insight with your own questions. So be sure to ask some questions from your years of experience. So almost 43% of you at 16 years, but then a nice balance of folks who are brand new to the profession and those of you who have been in for a little more time. So awesome. Thank you for giving us that information. So what we decided to do before we got to which questions did we want to ask of this panel and also to help them think about their thoughts, we wanted to get the pulse of the profession, right? So we appreciate that 217 of you asked or answered our survey questions. So we had a great response, and we're going to share with you the responses to those questions. So first of all, we asked, prior to COVID-19, did your agency have a teleworking policy? So a large number of agencies did not have a teleworking policy before, but we do appreciate that about 38% of you did, so that's great. The next question was, how well do you feel you've adjusted to working remotely? So about 55% of you said, hey, we're doing really well. We've adjusted easily. And about 30% of you said it's going pretty good. We're making some minor adjustments along the way. And then a smaller percentage that indicated it's still a bit of a struggle, but we're doing okay. Sorry about that. I'm trying to get my next, there we go. Next question was, what percentage of your week is spent telecommuting? So about 50% of you are telecommuting full time, so not at all surprising, and then you can see a variety, but most of you are spending a good portion of your time telecommuting. How well do you feel your agency has adjusted? And so this was really insightful for us because we want to get a sense of where the agency's prepared in addition to us as individuals being prepared. So fairly well. Well, majority of you said, you know, they were somewhat prepared, but we are working through some bumps. Next, we've got what has been your greatest challenge working remotely? So we had about 40% that said, you know, we're dealing with technology challenges. So that's an issue. We had about 10% said working with processes and procedures has been a bit challenging. About 16% of you said engaging and collaborating with peers has been a challenge. About 8% challenged with engaging with the customers and users. A very small percent said supplier interaction. And then about 10% saying engaging with those schedules and continuing the commitments in a virtual world has been a bit challenging. Next, we have how well has your manager or supervisor been doing in keeping you feeling motivated and engaged? So we ask you to kind of rate them, and you rated them a 7, so not too bad, a little bit more than a 7. And then next was for managers and supervisors, how would you rate your performance managing your team in a remote environment? So we had about an average of a 4. You can see fortunately, nobody said 0, but we had a small percentage at 1 and a good percentage actually giving them a 5. So not bad. And then again, for the managers and supervisors only, what's been your biggest challenge from your perspective? So a good chunk, about 23% said staff performance. Managing staff performance is tough right there alongside technology. A little bit smaller percentage for process and procedure. And then about 32% at employee engagement. So that was the biggest challenge in the response. And then a little bit of you said working with end users and getting things done in a timely fashion. This just speaks to the percentage of staff, again, from the managers and supervisors' perspective. We have a large percentage of them who are working with fully remote staff. And then various degrees who have some in the office and some remote. Then we've asked what's been their biggest challenges as managers and supervisors. So again, we've got staff. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, wrong question. My apologies. I'm looking at 2 screens and not doing a good job of it. So how challenging has it been for you as the supervisors and managers making that transition to managing staff remotely? So you guys are feeling pretty good. Some bumps along the way, but the vast majority of you seem like you've been making that transition fairly effectively. And then the last question that for some reason didn't show up, how would you rate yourself? And they rated themselves an average of a 4. So again, really appreciate everybody answering those questions for us. And that has helped our panel prepare, taking into consideration your thoughts. And so now I want to get into talking with our panelists. And I'm going to queue up the first question to Todd. You know, our focus in this first part is really on people and performance. So we know that our profession is a very strong advocate for supporting, developing, and advocating for the professionals in the role in the agency, but also in their professional life. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that human side of remote workforce management first. So, Todd, from your experience, what key competencies do you pull upon as an effective remote manager?
Yeah, thanks, Marquita. And I do want to touch on that. And I want to kind of set a little bit of the stage. But first, it's great to, be able to have this conversation today. And it is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I've been lucky to work with global remote teams over the last 15 years. And over those years, I've really been able to see, some significant changes that have come across. And, things are getting easier in a lot of cases in forming connections and accessing our data as technology has progressed. So there's been some really good and significant improvements that help us work remotely. But the challenge that I think we are seeing today is that, we're in this kind of fevered pitch that everybody was all of a sudden quickly thrown into this remote environment, right? We weren't planning on it. One day we were in the office, next day we were at home, and in a lot of cases, we've never experienced it before. We weren't fully prepared, right? So we were in this kind of awkward mix. And if you take a look at that, and then, in this mad rush, we haven't had the time to address skills that are needed to be successful managing at a distance. I may not have been building my skills over the years because I was a place-based work environment, right? And so I was kind of caught off guard. And really, we're not alone. Managers, as I read constantly, managers all over the world now are facing this situation. And what they're having to do now is they have to backfill on competencies at a time of high stress, right? So, it's a challenging time. But Marquita, you mentioned it, and I saw we have a variety of people on this call. This new remote environment is impacting all levels of employees, right? So it's important as we look at competencies that we look at, how do we build competencies across, and what are those competencies across kind of the foundational level, but also looking at our management and the executive levels, right? Because I think many organizations are going to find that this is probably the new working environment, right? So what are those skills? What are those competencies, right? And how do we go about building the competencies now that are going to be needed to be successful when you find yourself now in a remote manager, because you'll most likely be in it for a little while. And I think a key piece of this, and probably not odd coming from me, but is really integrating it into your lifelong learning paths and your plans. You really need to start integrating these skills if you haven't already, starting to lay that plan down. To help with that, my team and NIGP is really looking at how do we create an integrative kind of a comprehensive framework that's going to go over every rung of that remote work ladder, right? Since we are crossing all the different ladders. So, I want to get to that original question. And so I looked over the feedback. I also did, my research, and we've been looking at this for some time. And Marquita, if you can just slide up that one slide of mine, it kind of shows you a word cloud. And these are the kind of key competencies that are really coming to attention in industry literature. But also, as I read your responses, I could see those themes coming through, right? And so you can see them here on this slide, right? You're going to see those traditional competencies that have been around management and leadership, things like communications, conflict management, time management, those tried and true management principles. Those are going to take on a different flavor when you're in a remote space. So what are the additional skills that you need in order to work inside that space, right? But you're also going to notice on here some new skills that may be either new to you or that you find need extra attention in this new world, right? Digital proficiency, right? On that chart, we saw a lot of people were, some of the difficulty was in the technology side of things. So how do we increase our digital proficiencies? But you're also seeing performance management, project management. Those are going to take on a different angle. From a remote perspective, you're not going to see your staff. So how do you gauge performance? And my peer presenters today are really going to get in to a lot of these competencies, and you're going to see how they applied these inside their entities and in their workspaces, right? But I do want to talk, building trust is a big competency, Marquita, that has, I see that in a lot of literature and a lot of reading that I'm doing that is saying you really got to, build and make sure you're paying attention to that building trust inside the workforce. So just to kind of conclude, as you're looking over these, and again, you're going to see these kind of dived into as we progress and seeing examples, we're busy here. We recognize the need to, help with the educational component of this. So I do want to let you know, we are working on a lot of things that will help on here. One of the things that I'm excited about, Marquita's in on this with me, is we're launching a new mentorship initiative. And, mentoring, this will allow you access to peers and experts on a variety of different topics, but we're going to use remote workforce, remote learning as one of our kickoff areas, but you'll be able to engage in this new mentoring activity probably within the next month or so in a virtual and a social setting. So I think that's something to look forward as you try to build these skills. We will enhance our webinar sessions every month or every quarter. We will start to implement a lot of these techniques into those sessions as well. So those are some of the free opportunities that you'll be able to take advantage of. And then overall, more of a formal basis, we're going to constantly put these into our leadership competencies that we're building now. Those will be just enhanced to take a remote side of the house. And then we're actually looking at, do we create a specialization certificate for managers and executives in a remote space? And how do you work and plan and set strategy in a remote environment? So, Marquita, a lot of interesting things going on, but, I would recommend, zeroing in on taking a look at these competencies and really kind of putting those into your learning plan.
Absolutely, and those are such great points that you covered, Todd. And matter of fact, we had my good friend Terry out in Tennessee mentioned there's some other competencies that we're going to obviously be important and are going to be blended in there. Terry specifically called out adaptability and flexibility, which absolutely, gosh, if there's ever a time we've got to be adaptable and flexible, it's right now. So great point, Terry. And Todd, thanks for sharing, and thanks for sharing about the mentorship program. We're really excited about the opportunities that are coming with that. So thank you. And, something that Todd spoke to is the relationship building and those softer skills, right? And in the responses to the survey, we could see that, certainly some of the challenges that you are facing, whether you're a manager or whether you're a staff, is how do I keep those relationships strong? How do I build those relationships in this type of environment? And Kate, I'm going to toss the next question out to you. How do you continue to build relationships in this world of virtual engagement and remote workforces?
Yeah, so thank you. Thank you very much. I think, that's been a challenge, right? People want connections to each other, and many times our offices become our second families. And during this time, we've been separated physically, but still dependent on one another in our working relationships to continue to work and do our jobs. And how do we do that? And I think for us as managers, we've had to think outside the box to address the uniqueness of this situation. And I think first and foremost, it's very important to let your employees know you trust them. right? So you trust that they're going to do their job remotely. I think for a lot of us in procurement, working remotely has not been at the forefront of our industry, and I'm hoping now we see that we can do these things. We can work remotely, we can engage with vendors remotely and engage with each other, and not worry so much about being remote. Building that trust with them, letting employees know, I'm not going to control your day, right? You may have to work in this particular situation. You may have to work 8 to 11, and then you may have to take a couple hours off because you have young kids at home, and then you may come back and work later. But it's knowing that they'll get the end product done. And I think that's really important. I think daily calls, you have to call and talk. There's something to be said for not just emailing, right? For me, I make sure I talk every day to all of my employees, and up the chain also, I talk to my boss every day, and I try to talk on the phone a little bit more with people and keep open communications. I think it's important, that people feel comfortable in setting up their home space, and just balancing their home and work, and talking to each other about those things. So as we do we've done some virtual Zoom meetings to catch up every week with each other. We've talked not just about work, but about other stuff like you would in the office. And taking that time to socialize. So I think there's a lot of different ways we can build those relationships, and there's a lot of tools out there. But I think the important thing is to be flexible with each employee's needs, because some employees adapt much better to remote working than other employees, and you have to understand how to make that transition for both employees, both sets of employees. So I think also, Sharita, you had some things to add also.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you, Kate.
Yeah.
So in my current role at my agency, I function as a procurement consultant. And so part of my job at the onset of the position was to develop a relationship. And so it dealt specifically on building trust. One of the things, or another part of our function is, again, it's on procurement consulting, and it also deals with compliance. And so my group, or my team members, we are out to make sure that the agencies in under our purview, that they are in compliance with the law. And so again, building trust with someone is very important, because you want them to know, I'm not here to just, review you and, make recommendations, but I want to know how you operate and understand, what your mission is, so that we can succeed together. And so part of my team full-time works remotely. And so the majority of us were forced into this full-time telework position in March. And most of us, again, I was one that worked just one day teleworking, but it involves, again, navigating change, constant change every day. And again, relationship management is key to that. And for your teammates as well, one of the things we noted down, Kate, was social interactions. And so part of what my team, or those that work with you, had to come to understand is that you can't just peep over and say, hey, well, Kate's at her desk, let me ask her this question. It became a virtual, contact. And so sometimes it may be I stepped away, and just making your coworkers or clients understand, I may be with you in like 5 minutes, so I'm still doing the same thing at my desk, I'm just doing it virtually. So again, I think the major part of this is going to be our relationship management and the trust that we have with our clients.
And great points, ladies. Again, that relationship building and maintenance of good, strong relationships with our colleagues and our staff and our supervisors is so essential. And I appreciate some of the dialogue we've got going on in our chat box. So as a reminder, if you're able to and you have a question, just throw that in there. And I appreciate John's already responded to one of the questions, and I'll throw this out to you, Kate and Sharita's. The question was, should senior management, have to come into the office to set an example while the others are working remotely? And John's shared from his perspective, it might depend on the culture, but it's not necessary to come in the office, but rather set the example of what is expected when it comes to communication,
Yeah.
trust, and as a leader. And it's such a great point. Any follow-up points for you guys on that?
Yeah, for me, our entire agency has been working remotely. So I don't think that you need to set an example. I don't think being in the office sets the example. It's you're working remotely and you're engaging with people, and people know you're working and you're talking with people and you're having conversations. That sets the example. That's how I feel. Sharita?
And so we've taken a phased approach in that here in Virginia, we've had phases of reopening businesses and
Yeah, we're
government,
doing
et
that.
cetera.
Yep.
And we just recently here in Virginia entered into phase 3 or are on the cusp. I believe we are in phase 3 now. And so our senior management team is now building the framework for a return to work plan. And what that really, and again, it depends on your culture and your need, but what that really entails is that maybe senior management staff kind of rotate along with staff rotating on who comes into the office, because I think we still are, for the most part, following the 6-foot rule. So if
Yep.
you're in an office space where you're cubicle, it may be safer, to continue that phased in approach until, we have better recommendations from, government bodies.
So, and just to follow up on that, we have been involved in purchasing those things. There have been things that we've had to purchase for bringing people back to apply, to be able to fulfill those 6-foot rules and giving people separation. And we also, Sharita, thanks for that. We also are doing a phased in return to work approach. Mm-hmm. So executive leadership will go back first, and then we'll slowly bring back managers and directors, and then we'll slowly bring back our regular staff employees, but it'll be an A-B schedule. And, for me, I've said to my workers, you decide what days you want to work. Do you want to be an A schedule or a B schedule? And I will intermingle in those days. I'll be on both schedules. So that's how we're doing it also.
I'm looking at and find out how many. It looks like it was about 65% maybe that said that they did not have a teleworking policy.
Yes.
And so I think as we now have been forced into the new norm, I think that think that it will open the door for, for different planning, for the future.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, ladies. Those are such awesome insights and a lot of great ideas. And I know we've had some folks chiming in on other ways to stay connected, whether through MS Teams, instant messaging, and Tracy also offered, she's got a agency building that 40 to 60% footprint moving forward. And let's touch upon kind of on this next topic related to building relationships is also how to keep staff motivated and engaged. And I'm going to have John lead off on this next question. And this is going to be interesting because John represents our private sector, right? All our suppliers and contractors community. And this will be great for us to kind of look at, I'm sure, a lot of similarities between how the private sector engages and keeps their employees motivated and things that will work equally effectively in the public sector, and also maybe some things that might be a little bit different. So, when it comes to keeping staff motivated, particularly in this remote environment, John, what are some ways that you've kept your staff motivated and engaged in this environment?
Yeah, well, thank you, Marquita. First of all, I guess, I think that people need to feel like they're contributing to something. Like, again, as Kate and Sharita mentioned, actually, Sharita mentioned social interaction being an important part of the engagement process and relationship management. I also think it's important that we have fun along the way. And we can all do this. And whether it plays into our personal time, there is an opportunity for us to play some online games, some virtual happy hours. And in our case, we recently did a 2-day training. I think more than ever, we have more capacity to do additional training, which is great that Todd had mentioned some of the trainings that are available on NIGP that we have the ability to do those types of training right now. And from a happy hour standpoint, what we did is we created a trivia happy hour. So using Zoom like we're using here today, we had a trivia host come in at the end of our first day and ask questions to a group. We had nearly 100 people on the training. So this was people from all different divisions within the Toro company, and people that don't typically work together were coming together in this training. And as a Zoom administrator, they were able to send us off into randomized groups, in groups of 5 or 6 people, to collaborate on the questions and answers after the trivia host would ask the questions. So we'd then break off into these individual private rooms and have individual conversations, discuss the questions. Once we got through those, we were able to have our own just personal dialogue. And it really helped us to build relationships with people from across the divisions and across the company. And it ended up being one of the biggest highlights from the entire training session. And we had some great speakers on there. We had really good training. We actually had some procurement folks and fleet managers come in and talk to our team about how to call on government sector. At the end of the day, the biggest highlight was the trivia happy hour. It allowed people to really connect. And I know from my own personal standpoint and the team that I manage specifically, they're now collaborating with other people from outside of our division and working on projects together where they wouldn't have otherwise. And that doesn't come from being in a big group setting like this, like we're doing here today. It's breaking off into the smaller groups, into the smaller channels or private rooms, and allowing us to really build on that relationship piece that Sharita was mentioning. And lastly, I would say that it helps simply to keep the morale up. Now more than ever, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, we have a platform here virtually that we can either hide ourselves in a video setting, but also to have a voice without standing up in front of everyone and having a conversation. So it allows everyone the opportunity to really engage with and connect with their counterparts within their company, and also from a customer standpoint.
Great points, John. Thank you. And does anybody else on the panel want to follow in on that about staff engagement?
So one of the things that I suggested at the onset of us moving to full-time telework was a March Madness game. Not only because March was procurement month, but also we were in the middle of losing, the human interaction of, basketball, March Madness. And so everybody was kind of sad. And so to help build team morale with my team, I asked our team leader, my director, if it was okay if I would share this game. And so me and a couple other coworkers, we developed a bracket. And the bracket actually was about non-traditional ways of connecting with the client, right? Because we were now in this pandemic, and people were panicking. And of course, we are the core piece to any organization. So again, procurement needs were at a peak, right? So how can we, ease the pain of the anxiety of the pandemic, but yet still have fun in doing what we do and servicing our clients? And so while it was a great idea and we were thinking, what are we going to do full-time at home? It ended up being that overwhelming, because again, it was a phase of calm and anxiety, but then there was a phase of, okay, I'm really ramped up on work, and servicing my clients. And so we didn't get to do it. But ideally, it was a great idea out the door, because that was giving people ideas of how to stay engaged. Because a lot of what we do is go out to make personal contacts with visits with our clients. We're no longer able to do that. And so there were innovative ways to virtually reach out to the client, or take the dust off of the paperwork where we may have not been able to reach out to them. And so that was one of the innovative or virtual team morale events that we came up with.
Great. And we have lots of people offering other ideas. Kathy mentioned their office does a 15-minute team huddle each day, and people have shared, you know, just some fun things that they might be doing, like share a picture with your team members of your home office. So lots of great ideas. So definitely, Deanna said we had everyone post a baby photo, and then we all had to guess who it was. So I love these, you know, keeping things light, because we know working from home can be stressful, especially for some folks who have a lot of activities going on at home. And in fact, we'll be talking about that work-home life balance in a moment, but appreciate all the great dialogue going on in the chat box. And in fact, I'm going to ask this question because, and it might tie back to the previous one, but let me just ask this. Someone did ask if anybody's experienced people who've refused to come back to work if they needed to be in the office. Have you guys run into that yet?
We have not gotten to the point that we're back in the office, but it is highly recommended, or highly on the chatter box of, you know, what are we going to have to do when we come back? So again, I think people looking at the numbers are performing well overall. And so they are, you know, wondering, you know, what's next? What's this next phase?
Yep.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that too. As part of the prep for this session, my wife is an HR manager, and she does a lot of work with COVID response. She's part of the COVID response team at her work. And it's an interesting question, but she's had a number of employees that do not want to return back to work. They're simply afraid of customer interaction. She works for a chain of banks, and they don't want to have that in-person interaction. I think it's different in an environment where you don't have customers coming in the door. We have a lot more ability to separate in a professional setting where we don't have customers walking through the door. But importantly, unless there's some real underlying reason for them not to, some health related reasons why they just shouldn't be in a risky environment, the recommendation from her and from the SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Managers, is they're expected to come in. And that's their job. And if the position of the organization, as Kate and Sharita mentioned, there's probably going to be a phased approach in most situations. And it's our job as employees to follow that phased approach and rely on the fact that our organizations are going to do the right thing based on the recommendations of the CDC and the World Health Organization. And
yeah. Thanks, John. And so I think also for me, we have not had people yet say they don't want to come back. I work for a very large education district, so there are a lot of different positions within that district of people who are out there, right? And so as we move forward, and we certainly hope the phased approach of returning back to work will instill some confidence in people as we see the numbers start to go down. But some of the investment we've made was key to making people feel comfortable, and that was in furniture and office setups and separating people and giving people more space. We will see what happens as we move forward, but you know, we're hopeful that people will feel more confident as time goes on.
Excellent. Well, let's talk a little bit about productivity, because that's come up from a number of your comments and also in our chat box. You know, the tough part, especially when you're a manager or supervisor, is now you've got folks you don't necessarily get to see, and sometimes you're not even seeing all the work product, things in progress, and how do you manage and measure all that? So I'm going to queue up Sharita to lead off on this question. But Sharita, what's your experience on how you're measuring productivity for your staff in this environment?
So one of the things our team does is routine meetings. And again, that gives you hands-on with project management. And, in procurement, we always say document, document, document. But in this case, I'm going to say communicate, communicate, communicate. So we've done things such as sharing screens, because again, you're no longer able to come to someone's office and show them a document or, a file per se. So those things have now become a virtual platform. So technology is key in measuring productivity, I would say. Someone mentioned earlier webcams, and I think that was through the chat group, I'm not sure, but a lot of people not having, webcams. So that was something that, my organization assisted in for those that are trainers, right? So I'm one of the trainers, and my PC was not equipped with a webcam. And so that was one of the first things I received when we, dispersed to home time. And again, this gives or assists with the personal touch. And again, our focus today on managing remote workforce is the people. So even though we're in a technical situation and relying on technology heavily, we rely on it as well to be able to give that personal touch and seeing people.
Yeah, and if I can chime in here as well, I would just add that as managers, it's our responsibility to set clear goals with specific due dates. And I think both of those are important to make sure, again, it's clear and specific in what we're providing to them. But as Todd's word bubble had communication as the biggest word block that was on there, I believe, communication is probably the biggest component to proper productivity measurement. So much of what is out there and written about productivity and remote employees is around trusting your employees and making sure that you set clear and concise goals and specific due dates, and then you follow up with them and make sure that they're accomplishing those things. For me, pre-COVID, we were having monthly meetings where we would we'd share updates, best practices, challenges, and successes. Now we're meeting on a weekly basis, and along with those monthly meetings, and the weekly meetings are more or less formal. They're how was your weekend? It's Monday afternoon is when mine is scheduled for with my team, and it's let's talk about your weekend, your kids, what's going on in your family, also what's going on in business, and it just plays into it. And as you set that up, it creates more of that communication and allows you as a manager to really feel what's going on with your employees.
And so, John, to your point, that's kind of what my director had with her staff, is that she calls it her one-on-ones, right? And so we moved from, we're doing them bi-weekly, and we still maintain that same fashion. And so again, that's your time to share what you need from her, what she may need from you on ongoing projects that you're managing. Not details. These meetings are only 30 minutes. And I see someone saying they have one-to-ones with staff as well. I really appreciate those, because again, that keeps her building trust with the team. And then at the same time, it gives that personal time to, she also she calls it like a check-in. And I know she's involved in another meeting, and I did tell her that I was going to throw her tactics out here to NIGP, but I think that is one of the greatest assets that she has with her team, is that one-on-one time to talk about projects. And again, just a social check-in. How are you doing in this new environment? Very essential.
We must have similar managers, because we call them the same thing. We have check-ins, we have the one-on-ones. And the one last point that I just wanted to make as well is making sure that we celebrate more successes. Again, as it's tough to have that interaction and keeping morale up, we would celebrate the big wins that would come in. And now more than ever, it's important to celebrate even the smaller little wins that we have, whether that be on training accomplishments, whether that be on even personal accomplishments, that we celebrate more of the successes that we as individuals are having.
Yeah, and Marquita, just a quick point, just to elaborate a little bit, and John points out, and I mentioned it earlier, the whole component around trust really just, I think, amplifies it, because we're all dispersed, but you know, in our space, we're very production driven. We have a lot of projects that take place. So a lot of, and it didn't change a lot when we moved to remotely, but a lot of that control and how the work is accomplished is moved to the staff member who is actually accomplishing it, right? So we set overarching milestones along the way, but really turn the control and execution over to the employees to figure out, you know, how is the best way that they're going to get to these main goals, right? So not for us to get down and measure all of the performance components down to the nth degree, but really kind of keep it high level and just make sure that we're hitting our key targets, right? And so again, just really putting the control in the employees' hands, right? I mean, they're the key ones.
That's a great point, Todd. Thank you so much for pointing out the trust, right? That's so critical. And I see from a lot of the comments, I imagine that's a challenge for some who are used to having a bit more perceived control of their environment and their staff teams. And, you know, I think it's helpful, especially as people make this transition, because it's not easy on everybody. And I'm going to ask Kate to lead off on this next question, but also in addition to the question, think about another question that was brought up by someone. I think Terry asked about, you know, how are you handling those people who are really, oh no, I'm sorry, it was John who said, you know, how do you handle when people are really struggling emotionally? And so many people are in this work-life balance dilemma, and that's been a challenge for people even pre-COVID, but now more so. You have people who are used to at least having some physical separation between those two worlds, but now they're all mashed up together. So how do they strike that balance, Kate?
Yeah, so I think thanks for that point. And I think, you know, this is really important as we're remotely working and trying to keep our communication open. And, you know, as I said earlier, you know, one of the most important things for me every day, and it takes time, is to call every employee individually and talk with them on the phone to have an actual conversation, or Skype them. We use Skype a lot, so we can visually see people. And I think that's important also, so you can see differences in people. And if you as a manager see something that you might think is concerning, or if an employee has shared something, you know, you have to have a plan to reach out to HR, to reach out to your employee assistance programs. Those things also should be part of your policy. So a lot of us said we didn't have remote working policies and we were kind of doing these on the fly. But one of the things that should be in there is phone numbers for people to contact HR if they need to, or the employee assistance program. And I think having those individual conversations, or Skype chats, the video chats, or Zoom calls, or Microsoft Teams, however you're deciding to do it, I think it's important if you can do some video talks also, so that you can see each other. You also, like, make sure people are taking breaks, that they're going out and walking. Exercise has become really important, right? I don't know about everybody else, but I certainly have put on the COVID-19, I will tell you. And so I think it's important for us to, you know, come up with a plan to do that. So we've kind of, in my department, challenged each other to go out and walk, and we're recording our steps and doing things like that to keep ourselves moving. The balance of home and work, right? So as we work remotely from home, some of us have fallen into it very easily, and we get more work done because there's no interruptions, right? And you get in your zone. And sometimes you can get into your zone and look up and it's 6 or 7 o'clock and you're like, wow, where did the day go, right? So, but it's important for us to know that you have to at some point shut things down, I think. And you'll be more productive the next day. And, you know, also take some time off. You know, as an agency, we had a couple of big conversations as an entire agency. So we hosted conversations where, you know, 800 of us were on this kind of conversation call And it was led by a panel, but it was engaging to all of us. And they had separate breakout rooms for different people on different things, but it really was engaging and it got people back together again. So I think those things are important. Someone in one of the chats said, and I liked this idea, that they had people show their home office. They had people show pictures of it and everybody kind of rated different things. And I think that's a great idea. Because, you know, as we're working here at home, we take some pride in how we're setting our offices up. So I think that is important too. But again, I think that piece of how people are doing social emotionally is really, really important.
Any of my other panelists want to offer any other perspectives on that one?
Yeah, I would. So from a work-life balance, that is an important subject for me. Toro has been has definitely been the best place that I've ever worked from a culture standpoint. And the reason being is they set such a great work-life balance. Although the expectation is for most people to be in the office, in the pre-COVID world, that clearly changed here recently. So two things that I would offer up that I think are important, at least for me, and what I've seen from others who have embraced these two things, is that it is very successful for them, and that is creating a dedicated workspace. For me, and I saw people mentioning this in the chat section as well, is having kids at home. We had kids at home for the last 2 months of the school year, and my wife works full-time, I work full-time, and now we have 2 kids at home that are also working full-time. And so we created a dedicated workspace. I'm fortunate that I have an office. My wife set up a card table in our front room, and that is her dedicated workspace. My kids, this was my wife's idea. I'm giving her the credit for this, but she set up or created a kind of a block area. It was a trifold cardboard thing that you would use for like a presentation, and had the girls, each of my girls, create and decorate their own. And then that would sit in front of them to help shield them from outside distractions. One sat at the kitchen table, the other set up a card table in the basement, and that was their workspace. And I think it's really important that we know that that is our dedicated workspace. It allows us to flip that mental switch and really focus on work while we're in that environment. And reversely, when we're outside of that environment, that's our lifetime. That's our living space. And that's time you should get away from your computer and away from your phone. And the second thing that I think is really important is creating the schedules. Creating a schedule and sticking to it. So many people I've talked to, whether friends or colleagues, they're also trying to manage a work-life balance with kids at home and pets and everything else that may be interrupting them. And by creating a schedule up front and sticking to that schedule, which includes a routine, wake up in the morning. If you shower in the morning, get up and shower, brush your teeth, eat your breakfast. Do these things on a regular basis will help you create that separation between what is work time and what is personal time.
So if I may, I want to piggyback on what Kate mentioned as far as, setting up the home and, backgrounds to your point, John. And so as you all see today, I decided to invite you into a space of my home. And again, I would have decided to flip my camera around and put me in a camera, but I'm most comfortable looking out the window over here. And again, at the onset of COVID, I shared my space with 2 full-time college students, one of whom is a music education major. So every day around this same time, we would be serenaded by music, a musical selection of some sort. And so again, it's just becoming comfortable and making those around you. We were all forced into this environment. And so I think we've seen children walk by, we've seen pets walk by. A few minutes ago, my daughter texted me and said that she was thirsty. And I said, come down real quick, when I wasn't on film. because my kitchen is behind me. So we've adapted to all sorts of closed-mindedness, you know, whether it's teleworking, trusting folks, you're forced to do it. And I think that, again, I'm thankful that we decided to have this conversation today, because I think it's going to open the door for so many, you know, work entities that were not allowed to now do that, because we've proved that, you know, 100-fold, that we're able to work remotely, get the job done, and in most cases exceed the goals, you know, in this environment. So I think all of this, and I'm loving the chat group that things are coming up. One of the other things that came up was power outages. So for us, if we experience a power outage, I have a work phone, so I would text my my supervisor and say, hey, I got a power outage. I'm working straight from phone now. And I would move on like nothing ever happened. And shortly thereafter, I would be back up. And again, some adjustment would have to be made for time, but we've dealt with that as well.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Sharita. I know for myself, I have a hotspot also on standby. So, and we do have these, especially as kids are also remote learning from home, right? I have a teenager here. And so there's only so much bandwidth to go around. And so sometimes I've had to pop onto the hotspot, and it's been, you know, seamless for those sorts of things. And also, you know, just getting knocked off our server at work. So our IT department wasn't prepared, right, for the influx of people kind of remoting in. And we've had to do some changes there. And I think we'll make even more improvements over the next year, because I think everybody's going to be looking in that direction of making that IT infrastructure more conducive to people remoting in.
And poor Kara's dealing with a power outage right now, so we feel for you, and great points on that. And as a reminder, for those of you who are on the webinar, we're going to have a part 2 of this webinar series, and we're actually going to talk quite a bit about the technology piece of the challenges. So these will probably be points that will come up again then. Let's talk a little bit about some of the policy and procedure type of challenges. People are vital. Obviously, they're our greatest resource, but we know in order for them to work effectively, they've got to have the right structure, and they've got to have the right policies and procedures. And I know a number of people have commented about not necessarily having those things in place when it comes to working remotely. So we're going to switch a little bit and talk about some of the policy and procedure challenges, and just some of the things that you have seen for our panelists. I'm going to start off with John, but ask others to chime in that, you know, this crisis management of working remotely has created, I think, some opportunities and some values and some savings. And so whether agencies buy in or not, really they don't have much choice. And we've even had a number of people ask, are there some entities that aren't bringing people back that are going to stay remote? So we'll touch upon that in a moment. But John, what have you seen that's really been a positive that's come out of this switch to working remotely, maybe that wasn't anticipated?
Yeah, thank you, Marquita. Again, as I mentioned just a minute ago, Toro has a strong culture of working in the office. If you're based here in Minnesota, which we're based in Bloomington, Minnesota, they want people to relocate and live and work in and near the headquarters. There are some remote employees. There are certainly international employees in that we manage on a regular basis, and some positions that have required remote employment. As we've switched now into this new normal of working remotely, we've had to adapt to it, both from a technology standpoint, but also from a process and procedure standpoint, where we're doing things differently. We, from a supplier standpoint, we are now communicating with practitioners in this type of a setting, where before we had to get on a plane and travel to a destination that increases cost, it increases time, and you lose productivity. So while we're talking a lot about how do you manage productivity and in this new environment, from our standpoint, and if you think about it from most of the supplier standpoint, we're able to be more productive now than we were before. About 70% of my time was travel time. Now, again, I can work remotely. I can work in a hotel room and that. But from an efficiency standpoint and new policies moving forward, we're not going to have to jump on the plane nearly as much. I do not expect that my time will be spent 70% on the road, even once things calm down with COVID-19 and this pandemic. I would expect it to be somewhere around 30 or less percent, just because of the way that it has forced all of us to learn a new way of communicating.
And John, you mentioned productivity, and in the DC area, right? Pre-COVID, I mean, traffic can be a nightmare, right? 10 miles an hour drive, right? I mean, it just can be tough to move around in here. And what we're finding, and we have people in the outskirts, right, living in West Virginia and have to commute an hour and a half one way to get in. And over the last 3 months, right, everybody has gone into virtual work modes. That has removed that, 3 hours a day of commuting time that, to your point, is productivity increase in regards to NIGP. But I think for them, it's just you talk about work-life balance. I mean, just getting those hours back in your life, and spend with family and, work have been a really positive outcome for us. And so we're looking at, really what makes sense in regards to coming in versus remote work.
Yeah, excellent. And, somewhat related to that, I want to just and I'll pose this question to all of our panelists, but I'm going to queue up Kate first. Now we've got a little bit of experience under our belt, right? We've been doing this for a few months. And I think, as with anything new, there are some aha moments. There are going to be pleasant surprises, and then there's going to be unanticipated challenges. And so, Kate, as you think about those moments for you, and even maybe throwing in some resources on how you've dealt with some of those challenges, but what's been your aha moments in this post-COVID world?
So I think, for me, it's been a combination of making sure our policy is set up, because it wasn't, and making sure that the resources they need to call people, directories. We didn't have a real easy way of finding people's numbers. So we didn't have an electronic directory, and that was really important. Also letting people know how they can roll their office phone over to their cell phone or to a Google phone. So I think that was really important. And technology has really just been the biggest challenge for us, has been the technology challenge. One of the good things that we found, and we were like, wow, this is working great, is the Microsoft Teams notebook. We're all using that within the department. And so that's been a great way for us to all collaborate. So that has worked out well for us. And the utilization of Skype, I was reluctant to use it, and now I use it all the time. So that's been really great. Thanks.
Great. Todd, how about you?
For me, and I think NIGP, we're a very, we're a small team, we're a close-knit team, and over the years, I mean, we work closely together here in our offices. And so when we were, one day together, next day not, really coming to, and realizing, obviously those personal connections are important in the interactions, but really how much they played in to our day-to-day interactions when those are gone, right? And how do you then try to make up for them as best as possible using the technology that's available? So luckily we have the technology, but it doesn't replace still the water coolers. And I had one other person in with me today, and it was just nice to have a 6 foot away conversation with people, right?
Yeah, definitely. John, how about you? Oh, John, let's jump to Sharita then.
So I think my aha moment is just patting ourselves as procurement professionals on the back, and being who we are. And that is superstars of ever changing environments and conditions. And I just, want to say that we're amazing to be able to do that. And I know we touched on everything today, policy, technology, and all of these things were ever changing in order for us to do what we needed to do for our clients and for our communities. And so that's my biggest aha, is again, how important we are and how crucial procurement is to their organization.
Excellent. John?
Yeah, sorry about that. Again, the challenges of technology, right? I think the biggest aha is really how quickly we as society can come and adapt to change. Whether it's the education, the homeschooling, or the professional environment that we're all in, we've all learned a new way of working, and we've all learned a new way of communicating. And it really lends itself to driving us to be more productive in the future, to potentially gaining a better work-life balance for each of us as individuals in the future as well.
Yes, and just can't stress enough, kind of going back to the point that John made, is being in touch with the folks who are struggling during these times. And I really appreciate all the information that people have been sharing in the chat box about reaching out to your HR folks and making sure you provide numbers. And I think one of the panelists mentioned making sure everybody knows where the resources are to help them deal with those struggles, because you can very quickly find yourself in isolation if you don't actively reach out to others and let them know you're dealing with. I know we have a very large women's group on Facebook that is both social and professional, but really the purpose of it being that people always have a way to feel connected beyond just the work and have people that they can reach out to. So that's so important. We have about 15 minutes, a little bit more than 15 minutes to follow up on some great questions that have been posed by all of you. And again, as a reminder, if we don't get to your question live, we're going to do a follow-up directly to you for feedback from the panel on your questions, so don't worry about that. But I do have a question that was posed about Team Notebook. I think, Kate, you mentioned Team Notebook, so someone was asking, can you elaborate on what that is?
Hang on, I had to unmute, sorry. So in Microsoft Teams, you can set up different teams within that application. And so we set up a purchasing team. We also set up a COVID purchasing team, and that's the team that's buying the supplies. But then we have the bigger team. And so we use the notebook in there to bounce ideas back and forth, to take notes. We can always go back and look at it. Another good resource that we've come up with is a shared drive, and we save everything in the shared drive so that any of us can grab it at any given time. So that's what that was about.
Excellent. Well, let me go down to a couple other questions. Shirley asked, do you think people should stay set in their hours now that we're working remotely? This is an interesting one. Do we let folks just get their work done whenever they work? Or do we say, hey, you gotta be live and available set hours? And I'll let anybody who's interested in responding go on that one.
Rita, do you want to go?
Yeah, I would say live and available during business hours. And again, if your client, is flexible and you work with them after a traditional 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 time frame, then, and your management is flexible with you doing that, then I say do that. But I think that for business minded folks, you should have some, and again, this is coming from procurement professionals, conditions up front. So we'll
Yeah. Yeah, so we have a flex schedule to begin with. So our business hours are anywhere from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. So, within there, I expected my team to tell me where they would be. But obviously, if they needed to take some time off and a break during the day, that was fine, as long as they communicated it.
I would just agree with that. I think as long as you're setting the stage up front, as to when you're going to be available. The expectation should be that you're available in the morning and in the afternoon during business hours. And if you want to take some time in between there, or you have to run the kids somewhere, that flexibility does exist, and that you're expected to get your work done, whether it be 40 hours a week or 60 hours a week that you're putting in.
Yeah, I'm going to switch gears here to an interesting challenge. And gosh, I can appreciate for folks who don't have managers and supervisors like all of you, right? If everybody was like you guys, the world would be a better place to work in. But what do you do when you don't have a director or a leader that is good about doing these things, particularly communicating, which again can cause people to feel really isolated working from home? How do you deal with that if you're a staff member who doesn't enjoy a manager like you guys?
I'll jump in again. I want to let Kate and Sharita share more, just because again they're close tied to the public practitioner relationship and work. But one of the things that I've seen in our environment is not all managers are the same. Not all managers enjoy the same types of level of communication. And so we as employees have the opportunity to step up and create that environment. We have the ability to create the culture in this time, especially because it's new to everybody. So we've had employees that have set their own happy hours, and then the team follows suit. We've had employees that schedule just regular touch base calls, check-ins, as you will, again, just to create that more personal touch. So I think we have the ability as employees, and I would encourage you, if you don't have a manager that shares the same sentiment that we've discussed on this call, and you feel that it would be important to you, that you do it and you set it up and you schedule those things directly.
So part of what I'm thinking is that I think even from a managerial perspective that we're forced into this environment, and what conditions were normally there prior to COVID-19 are no longer there. Hence, I have someone I know that has all toddlers, her children are all under 5. And so again, you're thinking about the children in that sake, and where they were accustomed to going to daycare or going to school and being around their friends or extracurricular activities. And now all of a sudden, mommy and daddy say, I can't go outside, I can't visit grandma, I can't visit family. And so I think, again, if that is someone's, situation, try to have a one-on-one conversation with their manager. Again, we all are coming from diverse backgrounds and experiences, and all working towards the common goal and still maintaining our jobs, servicing our clients. But again, it goes back to that work-life balance. So I would encourage you maybe to have a one-on-one conversation with your supervisor, study your HR regulations, and see, how you can work something out between your supervisor. And that's probably the best advice that I would give you.
And some of these other questions kind of coming to the challenging situations that come up in this virtual environment, and 2 in particular I want to toss out for the group. How do you deal with an employee who might clearly be using their work time to do lots of personal things? So maybe they're running errands during the workday and not able to be responsive to a phone call or a WebEx you need them on, or they're on social media and you can tell because you see them out there and they're not being responsive to their work. Those are tough personnel challenges that come up, right? How do you deal with those?
I'll jump in from, from our side. I kind of go back, we do put that control back into the employee. We set overall goals and milestones and measures that people have to meet and really measure to those. And so, and maybe our environments we have the ability to be a little bit more flexible, but, as long as that employee is reaching those deadlines and not missing, work-related items, we allow for that flexibility to take place.
Yeah, so I think, as we talked about in the beginning, I think you have to be flexible in this environment, right? This is a brand new world for all of us. So I think you really do have to be flexible. I think, back to the question before this also, I think, sometimes an employee may be adapting really well, and maybe their manager isn't adapting so well to the teleworking, right? And to the IT situation. So just understanding that we all have those differences and trying to understand what is the struggle or what is the pushback on that you're getting. Is it because they're not understanding maybe Microsoft Teams, or they're not understanding Zoom, or this is not how they operate? So I think we have to have conversations and communication about it and try to understand what are the issues and work those out.
And Kate, just to that point, there are probably quite a few managers that were put into these positions and don't know really how to operate best in this. And so again, we're a smaller microcosm, but our seniors, we try to get together, we try to share best practices and really help the management as a whole learn the techniques and really modify as we go, so that that hopefully that water falls down into employees, and that employees have an open communications to a variety of management. So if they're having difficulties with a manager, they go to HR or to another senior manager to have those, and that we can then course correct, but really kind of real-time feedback to managers and providing them with best practices, to help them grow and learn in this new space as well, right? To be fair to them.
Yes.
So one of the things that I would like to say, and again, using us as resources, I would depend on, us, right, for all these things we're coming up with and discussing today. And of course, the chat group has been great. But why don't someone bring up the conversation in one of the insight groups, right? And then we can maybe speak to that point about, or sharing examples of teleworking policies, because it sounds like if your employer or you're unfamiliar with how to manage the remote workforce, maybe your organization didn't have foundation in place at the onset of the new, forced teleworking. And so maybe it would be helpful to look at some of the teleworking policies. But if you were semi-teleworking and now forced into full-time, that can be a great, frame to build your expectations for teleworking. And then that way, again, you have performance expectations, and then you have a way to rate your employees on such expectations.
Yeah, and that's a great recommendation, Sharita, is to remember the resources that you have in place with the Insight communities, and so many great resources that are out in our professional family who are so willing to share their information. And to the questions about, do you have a teleworking policy? Our profession's all about stealing somebody else's stuff and tailoring it to your own need, because there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. And we have so many great minds out there that have already started great products. So I really do encourage you to follow up on Sharita's recommendation and post some of these discussions in Insight, including go ahead and share those teleworking policies if you have them. 40% of you said you had something. Mind you, it may not have necessarily anticipated the magnitude of the teleworking situation we find ourselves in, but certainly likely a good starting place for folks who can build on that. Somewhat related to the teleworking resources, we've had a number of people kind of mention, well, what do you do when you don't have people who are set up? We have a couple minutes for this, so I'll let a few of you respond. What do you do when they don't have a camera to use Zoom, or they don't have the type of setup they need, and they want you to pay for all of it? You guys equipped for that?
we ran into some of that, and we did have to purchase stuff on the fly. And as all of us know, technology was very hard to come by once you got past March 30th, because everyone was grabbing at it. So we did have to get technology for people, and that's another key thing. And I think we're going to talk about that kind of in that follow-up. But it's also tracking the technology that we purchase for people, right? So we've created in purchasing a spreadsheet that we've just put everything into right now, so that we know who we've purchased what for and how we will get those things back into our agency once we come back, or if people continue to work from home and once the person maybe leaves. So we've been working with HR also in accordance, putting together a sheet where people will sign off on the stuff that they've gotten to acknowledge that it's our agency's property. But you do have to supply them with a laptop with a camera, and some people needed printers, some people don't need printers. So yeah, that's been an issue. And headsets, that was another one we needed to get people, headsets.
Great, thanks, Kate. Anybody else?
So I'm thankful that, again, my job is kind of mobile, but what is different, I'm spoiled, in which most of us are, in that I needed 2 screens, like, to make it at 100% full time. Like, working on a laptop wasn't gonna cut it. And we were able to go into the office. We scheduled a time with our manager, and we went into the office, and we were able to get what we needed. And so I'm actually looking at you, Marquita, right now on my laptop, but then looking at everybody else on my other screen, so I can have 2 screens. So those are the things that is the one thing that I was able to bring from the office home, in which it felt really weird that we were all leaving out of our building with all this government property. And again, that it was okay, but we were able, and again, that was tracked, what we have, and then again, returning back to work. So that's one thought that we were able to do as well. And again, it's just a point of planning, tracking, and executing.
And I think that's one thing, Sharita, that we need to do, is just make sure that we're tracking where things are going, because people are so used to the double monitors and, the setup you have at work, and then they were at home and they're like, oh, it's a little harder on the laptop, but you do have to put the controls in, because those assets are your assets, and so that they don't become others.
Awesome. Well, hey, guess what? We're out of time. You guys have had such a great time, I know, answering all these wonderful questions, and you've given great feedback and information. And thank you to all the participants. You guys have had just awesome things to share, and questions and things to get us all thinking. I do want to remind you of a few things. Yes, this session has been recorded, so that'll be available. And we are doing a part 2, and our part 2 is going to focus more on the technology challenges and also processes, and probably more tools. And I'm sure we'll touch upon some other related topics in that session as well. So I encourage you to join us. And as Todd mentioned, we're really excited about the mentorship program. And we're going to be sharing information out of NIGP on that. So if you're interested, stay tuned for that. Really want to thank Todd and Kate and Sharita and John for their insight. I know they're all available to you after this session. Again, we will reach out if we didn't touch upon your question and follow up with some responses from the panel. And we appreciate your time. This is a big chunk out of your day, but it's been very beneficial. I've learned a lot, so I'm sure you have too. And my thanks to Justin back at NIGP for helping us get this set up and taking care of us throughout the session. So everybody want to give a big wave? And because I'm a social media person, I'm taking your picture. Hey, thanks everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, Marquita. Great job to you as well.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
everybody. This was a great panel.
Thanks.
Bye.